you mentioned that you don't, it's funny, you're not interested in the data so much as you are interested in the results. And one of the things you see, like when someone starts playing around with like Google Analytics forever, they'll look at like the real-time data and they'll look at these vanity types of things. And I'm a big like GTD person in terms of how I set up and manage my time. But what I realize and what I've advised other people is the final boss with my GTD is like, I've got all of my next actions documented. I've got all of my projects prioritized, blah, 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 blah. And then in the moment, it's Tuesday and I want to sit and look at it. I don't feel like doing any of it, And so then what the hell do I do then? And I'd be curious to hear how you, I could see a scenario where you set this up and you've got, because we're just infinitely self-deceptive, right? So you set this up, the certain types of things that should constitute focus work. Like if I'm using these tools versus these tools, that should be a signal that I'm doing the most important stuff. But it's not necessarily a given, and I could hack it subconsciously or consciously toward doing things that look like they're focused, but really I'm not doing important things. At least, how do you deal with that final level of like, all right, I know what I should be doing? How do you avoid the self-deception and like make sure that you're focused on outcomes and not just on a new level of fake work, I guess?
What's interesting? Like, I'm going to admit something else here that I don't think I've ever admitted. I mean, I'm feeling very honest on this podcast. This is something that the old version of our software let us do pretty easily. Like for a little while, I worked at a company that was like very pressury about like how much work you got done, like how long you were there. And fortunately, it was a really fun job and I liked it. But I didn't like the sort of like friction of feeling like I was only doing like 3 or 4 hours of work a day. So I actually rebalanced my rescue time data so that things like Slack and email and meetings especially meetings, like actually counted for productive work, because meetings seem like they're productive and then sometimes they are, but they're not focus work. And so like one of the things that this new version does is, over the years, we've derived levels of abstraction. Like we started with tags, we added categories, which are like groups of tags, and now we have sort of like meta regions, right? So this new version has meetings as a concept. Meetings can be made up of, well, first of all, it's a calendar thing, so it's not even what you're doing. And in fact, if I were to be like sort of like if I was like in maybe my code tool right now, if I was in Visual Studio Code while I was talking to you during this meeting time, it wouldn't count any of that. It's not going to count any of that as focus work because I'm not doing focus work. So the meeting actually preempts any of the focus work time that would normally be generated by the backend system. And the same thing with like communication tools, the same thing with other sorts of things. So we're coming up with more, not just sort of like, we're not being stricter, but we're being more honest about like what it is that we care about, right? This is why productivity was a problem, because meetings are productive in a sense. Email is productive in a sense, but for a lot of people, they're not focus work, right? And focus work is the thing that people really feel like, unless you're obviously a manager, right? But managers have to do a certain amount of that too, is the thing that's actually moving things forward for you and for the business. So by creating that distinction and like protecting when it can happen, it can't happen during meetings. It really kind of like helps. And that's why our goal is a realistic one, right? Like we could set a goal for people to say, hey, you should hit 4 or 5 hours of focus work a day, which is possible. And the best people are going to do that sometimes, maybe not all the time, but it's not super realistic. If you keep a good pace, then you don't feel like you need to cheat the system, right? Like if we're just sort of honest about what everything is, then that's all that really, I mean, just sort of like, your watch tracking activity, it tracks your calories during the day, but you also can tell it when you're exercising, right? And that's like an extra distinction. Like, no, I'm serious about this right now. And we do the same thing with our focus sessions. Like you can start a focus session, which is an intentional thing. And we're building into it later on things like, what do you want to get done in this focus session? Did you get that thing done? And that's like that's a better way of sort of being accountable to yourself.